Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this installment of our Career Pathway series, Exiting Academia. Today, we have an interview that I hope you'll enjoy, and this one is actually of me. I successfully transitioned from completing 2 doctorates, one in psychiatry from Oxford and one in clinical psychology from the University of Konstanz, into the exciting industry vertical of education technology, also known as EdTech. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. Gertrude Nandra.
Hey everyone, Dr. G. Nandra here, and today I have the special honor of interviewing Dr. Jay Singh, Dr. Jay Singh, because he's an overachiever. So, so let's go ahead, Jay, and let's talk about your educational background.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, Dr. Nandra, it's a pleasure to be here with you today, and hello to everybody who's watching this interview. I hope that you find some of this insightful. So I have a very strange academic background. I always say that I'm just as academically ambiguous as I am ethnically ambiguous, because nobody knows what's going on up here, right? So I've got 2 doctoral degrees. The first one is a doctorate in psychiatry from Oxford, and the second one is a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Konstanz. And then I completed my postdoctoral training at the University of South Florida. And then after that started my journey in academia in terms of becoming a tenured full professor, publishing, I think we're at about 95 peer-reviewed journal articles, 4 different books, doing grants and these sorts of things, which is great. And then eventually, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, entering into industry in kind of academia adjacent fields.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you went all the way. You achieved the dream because because that's the dream. Like getting PhDs is become a tech professor, and you achieved that dream. What made you leave that behind?
Oh, I remember, G, it's something that like the blessing in terms of the journey that I've had that I'm excited to talk with you about today is that I feel like, that I brought it with me, as opposed to necessarily leaving it behind. And that's such a blessing in terms of the area of industry that I'm in. It was something where I still remember the day we had this big party to be able to celebrate kind of the full professorship, kind of being awarded. And I was sitting around with my mentor, who's this amazing guy named Stahl. And I asked him, I said, so Stahl, what's next? What's the next great adventure? The next big thing now, what do I do? What do you suggest? And I was very young at the time. So I was the youngest tenured full professor in the country of Norway. And I was 27 years old. And I asked him, I said, what do I do? And he's just like, well, Jay, it's just like, this is it, right? It's like, you're here. So now you just do this forever, right? Just get more students and, get more grants and these things. And, my heart was always with the students as well as my colleagues. I mean, this was something that made academia such a joy to be able to be in. The idea, though, that I could do something at kind of a larger scale that could benefit even more professionals, either in my field of clinical forensic psychology or in academia as a whole, was something that was very, very exciting to me. And it was very scary, of course, to even think about a world outside of academia. This is something I certainly got no training in. I think that if I ever, uttered the word resume instead of CV, my grad school supervisor would have been furious with me, right? So we just don't get a lot of training usually on something like that. So it was a scary transition, I would say, at the time.
Yeah, scary transition, but you made it. And I like how you said you didn't necessarily you left the institution, but you didn't leave the skills behind, right? Which we talk a lot about. So right now, for those watching and don't know, you are the CEO and founder of Publication Academy, right? And you started a business. You actually started a business and sold that business, and then before you started this one. So let's talk about your life as a business owner now, right?
Sure.
What a day-to-day looks like, and maybe even talk about that journey of selling your first business.
Sure, absolutely. So the first company that we had was really born out of a very deep passion for professional development for people who are practitioners in my field of clinical forensic psychology. At the time, one of my appointments was as senior clinical researcher in Switzerland for the Swiss Department of Justice, and absolutely loved that job. And one of the things that I was really blessed to be a part of was organizing trainings for clinicians all throughout the country of Switzerland. The issue that we found ourselves finding, and this was like early 2010s, and so this wasn't something where, even what we're doing right now, G, in terms of any kind of online anything, wasn't really a thing. It was very much on the kind of outskirts of stuff. Yeah. And we were, spending a lot of money bringing easily the most famous, the best clinicians in my field from all throughout North America over to Switzerland to give workshops. But understandably, even though they were pretty close by, clinicians all throughout the rest of Switzerland, we were expecting them to leave their spouse, leave their kids, leave their patients, leave their dogs, and basically, travel to be able to come to these workshops. And even though the workshops were offered for free, that's really giving up a lot to go to these workshops. And hence we would have these amazing trainers, but there wasn't broad access to those trainings unless you were there in person. And at the time, we weren't doing anything online. Now, I, at the time, of course, knew nothing about, I didn't know what a webinar was. I didn't know about any of these things. But I remember speaking with a colleague of mine there and saying, hey, listen, this is something that I'm really interested in. And it just wasn't a priority. And then I talked to some colleagues, and I'll never forget one colleague, very senior in my field, kind of, laughing me out of the room and basically saying, nobody will ever do training online, right? What a ridiculous, this was so ridiculous. Nobody's ever going to do education, training, none of these things online. But I really thought there was something there. And so I ended up moving, very difficult decision, and took all my life savings, moved back to America, and started my first organization, which was called the Global Institute of Forensic Research. And myself and our current Chief Operating Officer for Publication Academy, Katrina Godwin, she and I basically, ride or die, her and I, in terms of for that first organization. And we were very blessed to get into this at a time where if you were quality obsessive, which we are, and really are a mission-focused organization like we were, you could really make a big splash. And so because of that, we became one of the largest providers in the world for continuing education when it came to providing these CE credits for forensic psychologists, nurses, social workers, counselors. And we ended up training over 350,000 of those individuals over the course of less than 4 years, which was a huge blessing. And at that time, the notion of selling a business was something that I didn't even know that was a possibility. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know how it worked. The notion of all of this was completely beyond me. And even starting a business, I feel like being naive and being confident, and not being confident thinking that you're better than anyone, but being confident in yourself and the volition to be able to make a change that'll actually help people, for me was always very strong. And so not only did, we worked our butts off or whatever, I took 13 days off in 3.5 years, no weekends, every evening. I mean, that's all that I did. Lived in a shoebox, right, apartment. I went back and visited it a few months ago, and I'm like, how the heck did I do that, right? Like, that was crazy. But managed to be able to successfully exit with a Canadian tech company a couple years before starting Publication Academy.
Wow. Like, you condensed the story into such a short amount of time, but, just listening to the whole thing. Here's the question I have for you, Jay. Like, I think in listening to you talk, what I picked up was you recognize that, first of all, you recognize a need, which is what all businesses should do, is recognize a need in the market that needs to be met. And so clearly that was the mission. I want to meet this need. But you also recognize a trend pretty early, which was online education. Yeah. Right. And I'm like hilariously laughing at the person that said that, because we would never have predicted 2020 and how everybody came to rely on online education and how online education has boomed and will continue to. So you were at the very, very early, you know how you have the bell curve. You're the early starts of the bell curve. So that's so you have this skill, and we'll talk about skills, but you have this skill of recognizing things and of being a trendsetter. Would you say that's true? And how?
Sure.
Do you have that naturally, or did you develop that?
Oh, I would love to say that it's a mixture. I think that this is the truth, G, that it's a mixture between, dumb luck and putting yourself into a situation where you basically say to yourself, okay, I have to make this work, right? And I would love to be able to say that kind of everything was kind of, planned out, and I saw this clear opportunity in the market, and I said, okay, that's what I'm going to go after, kind of so on and so forth. In reality, what I have found for most businesses, right, and certainly this is the case for my first one and now the current one, certainly what I have found is that the ability to, in a very agile fashion, as they say, pivot when new information is brought to you and presented to you, and when new opportunities are really brought to you, is really one of the key skill sets that any small business owner can have. Very rarely are the dreams that we have for a company the same ones that we find if we get any kind of success, right? Are very rarely the ones that we actually end up achieving. But the story that I usually tell people, G, is that when I was a teenager, I really loved indoor rock climbing. And so my buddy Ty McCoy and I would go every single Friday, and him and I were planners, still am, definitely, planners. And we would sit at the bottom of this rock wall, and we'd look up this thing, and we'd identify the route. So we'd say, okay, see that big red, grip? Okay, we'll get that. Then you see the yellow, we can swing over to this one. So the one day we're doing this, we're planning this whole thing at the bottom. And this was a rock climbing gym that basically had the ability where you didn't need somebody else to be able to climb. You could take one of these carabiners, hook yourself in, and they called it an auto belay device. You could go up yourself. And there was this kid who was like no higher than my hip. He was a little kid. And by the time that Ty and I had kind of come up with this huge game plan, this kid was 3/4 of the way up the wall, right? And what I tell people now, which I think is so true and has been proven out certainly in my own life experience, is that sometimes you just got to get on the wall, right? You just got to get started and get on the wall and be willing to learn and pivot along the way when certain obstacles or opportunities are presented to you.
Yeah, no, but that's so good. That's such a great analogy. So I always ask people when we get on these interviews about their skills and transferable skills. I love your answer at the beginning where you said you didn't leave academia behind. What skills are you using now from your academic life as a business owner?
Sure, it's a great question. I mean, definitely the number one skill that I think that I refined during my academic career, which is really critical right now, is communication. Right. This is the key thing. And I would say communication in maybe 3 different ways. So the first is the ability to obviously clearly and concisely verbally communicate. And especially if you want to start a company, companies, we give this a term company, but it's just a group of people. And certainly if you're in any kind of managerial or a leadership position, you need to learn how to be able to play that role properly. And a key part of being an effective leader is being an empathic and clear communicator, and knowing what to communicate, how to communicate it, and why you're communicating what you're communicating, and not just saying things for the sake of saying it. So verbally, it's very important, certainly in terms of the nature of the businesses that I've had the blessing of running in the past. Most of it has to do with professional development and career advancement training. And so because of that, also the ability to verbally communicate through a camera to kind of a non-existent audience, which is still there, right? So you need to learn how to be able to do that. That's definitely a skill. And in terms of teaching classes, primarily in person, but then for that first company, everything being remote, I think I kind of honed my skills there. Written communication, this is something in academia where I remember when I started grad school and I was asked to be able to kind of, draft out my first manuscript. Oh, and I worked for weeks. I was so diligent. I wrote that thing out and I was like, this is a masterpiece. I'm like the Beckett of psychology. I'm amazing. I was also 20 years old, let's keep in mind, right? When I started that. So, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I'll never forget giving it to my doctoral supervisor. And he went on a trip and then he came back and I'm waiting with bated breath, right? I'm so excited to be able to get it back. And to be honest with you, I was expecting like, hey, great job, da da da. Oh no, right? So I ended up getting back this manuscript with the whole first page circled. And then the comment that I got was just the word no, right? With a red pen. And that was it. And sure enough, That's exactly probably what the feedback should have been, because I think about how I wrote then versus how I write now, which is very methodically, and where every single word or even every single grammatical device, what am I putting in parentheses? What am I hyphenating? What am I da 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 da? All of these things actually make a huge difference in terms of in the contemporary workplace. When people read your emails, almost like, if you get a very non-clear text message and you're like,
Yeah.
should I read into this? He just said ha ha, H-A-H-A. Does he actually think it's funny? It seems like maybe he doesn't. People are going to read it. They're going to project onto these written communications. So you need to get really effective about being able to persuade other people through literally the written word. And a piece of that is what I would say kind of this third form of communication is literally pedagogical communication. Now, this can be spoken and this can be written for certain in different ways, but the actual, I call it logic flow, is the number one thing I took away from academia that has resulted in both of my companies doing well, right? Essentially is being able to take content, right? And then being able to say, okay, if this is the information, this is the skill set, this is the subject matter that we want to present, to be able to teach someone else, right? So literally it's pedagogical in intention. Things need to be almost like a story, have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and have a structure where you're essentially literally telling, the listener or the viewer, this is what we're going to teach you and how we're going to teach it to you. Here's the order we're going to go in. Now, knowing that order, let's go through, da, 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 da. Here's the implications of what it means, and then let's go ahead, tie it up with a bow. And saying it sounds so easy, the practical application of it is something that, like with anyone, is very challenging for a very long time, and then eventually gets almost automated. So at this stage, it took me a long time to be able to deconstruct why it is, or rather how it is, that I'm doing this construction pedagogically of different trainings. And this is one of the big blessings of having employees. So at Publication Academy, we got over a dozen employees. And this is a situation where the biggest blessing of that is being able to say, okay, when these folks are coming in, even if they have a lot of experience in teaching, if we want to teach them the Publication Academy way of doing things, I need to clearly and concisely, ironically, teach them how to teach others. And that's been very fulfilling. It's almost like a journaling exercise, right? Where you're kind of like, getting all these new insights about yourself through that process. So I would say that those, in terms of transferable skills of things that I learned in academia, those would be the big three.
So we've talked about the skills that have allowed you to be successful in your current chosen career path. Is there anything you miss about academia? Anything that was hard about the transition, or that you missed?
Yeah, Gia, it's a great question. I would say that having a really deep sense of connection in person with students, I would say, is something that I miss quite a bit. I'm very lucky that I do some consultation on the side in terms of I have a YouTube channel that I run that is very student facing about navigating academia and specifically how to do things like get into graduate school and all. So it's really more, and then how to thrive once you're there. So, more for undergraduates and graduate students. And that gives me a great opportunity to be able to have more direct contact with the students. But one of the great joys of my job now is actually going around to universities all throughout the United States and Western Europe, where we have clients, institutional clients for Publication Academy. And there's really nothing like being on campus, walking around, seeing the students, eating in the cafeteria with so much energy around you, and talking with faculty members doing, just when I say insane, I mean the most impressive kind of work that you can imagine. And just knowing that you're able to support that kind of an ecosystem, even though now it's adjacent, so it's a little bit afar, but knowing that you can still make an impact on these stakeholders that you care about is a real blessing.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So you get to still fulfill that part of you.
Very much, very much.
So we're coming to the end of our conversation, Jay, and it's been really great hearing how you transition out of academia into building these businesses. For somebody just like you, who maybe they're tenured, maybe they're postdoc, maybe they're finishing their PhD, and they would like to turn their skills into a business, what would you tell them to start with? What are the first three things they should do?
It's a great question. So I would say the first thing is to be able to embrace the excitement that you feel at the concept of coming up with a new idea. I think that that is one of the great blessings of building businesses, is this initial phase of actually coming up with the concept of it, finding something that your heart is really calling you towards. But then in terms of dealing with those wonderful emotions, it's very important. I love Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and Thoreau's got a good quote about, don't worry if you build castles in the sky, that's where they're meant to be. Now build foundations under them. So it's wonderful to have this concept. It is absolutely critical, though, to be able to, in a very structured way, evaluate the feasibility of this idea that you actually have, and then to be able to conduct a really thorough competitive market analysis to be able to see, are there any incumbents who are already doing something similar to what you're doing? And just because there are, you don't have to get afraid of that, right? In fact, actually having incumbents who are competitors can be a real blessing, because then you know, hey, other people have done something similar to this. This means that maybe there's something here. So you don't have to be scared of that. The second thing that I would say is you don't need to worry if you don't have a business degree. I have no business background whatsoever. My father's a Harvard MBA. He's a brilliant guy, these sorts of things. But me, I got nothing, guys. I never took a finance class or an accounting class or marketing class. I never took any of these things, right? One of the great blessings you mentioned, G, about grad school, postdocs, faculty members, is a key thing in academia is teaching ourselves different topics, forms of statistical analysis in my case, research methods, teaching ourselves how to be able to write or learn new processes. You can really leverage that self-learning skill set that you've gotten from academia. And even though it's hard, it's definitely hard, right? Apply it to kind of a business mindset. And certainly not get caught up in the hype of the term. These days, it's so sexy for us to be able to call ourselves, entrepreneurs and these things. The way that I describe it to my employees is basically, let's do cool stuff and see if anybody actually wants to buy it, right? That's the simplest way to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's very, very helpful. Thank you so much, Jay. This has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot, and thank you for being inspiring and being the inspiring leader that you are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.